Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Matt Hamilton. I'm a developer advocate with the Arbitrum Foundation, and welcome to this first in a series we have called the Stylus Showcase Series. And in this series, we are going to be talking about Stylus. Stylus is the new thing just launched yesterday that allows you to build upon Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum Nova, using WebAssembly. So you can write smart contracts in Rust, compile them down to WebAssembly, and deploy them. And you get a lot more performance and a lot less gas per compute. So this is the first of this series. We're going to be talking to Renegade, who I will introduce shortly and bring them on. This is a series, like I said, we've got, I think it's 6 talks in this developer series. We then have a couple of talks from a user series. So we'll also be talking to Renegade again in the future, in which we'll be talking to them about their actual experience, Renegade as from an end user rather than from a developer point of view. And we're also going to be doing a Stylus Pro series, which is a series of workshops in which you can actually get hands-on with Stylus as well. And then coming up soon on the 9th of September, we have a mainnet mint of the first Stylus-powered NFT. So that will be coming up as well. So without further ado, let me introduce and we can bring on Chris and Andrew from Renegade. Hey, folks, good to meet you.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, welcome. So do you want to just give a brief introduction to yourself, and then we can start talking about Renegade?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chris. I'm the founder of Renegade. Started in 2022, and we've been grinding for quite a while, and we just launched mainnet. So we're super excited to be here and to show off a bit about what we're working on.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm employee number 3 at Renegade, including Chris. And I came on board last April, and I wrote the Stylus contracts. So very excited to talk about my experience doing that.
Cool. So the right person to be talking here. That's great. So we'll be interested to hear your experiences. So first of all, just to set the scene here for people that don't know Renegade and don't know what a dark pool is, can you give a bit of an explanation as to, a bit of the overview of the protocol? What is a dark pool? What is the problem that the dark pool is trying to solve, and what are typical users of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a dark pool, you can think about it as a privacy-preserving form of an exchange. So Renegade is the first on-chain dark pool. And dark pools are not new. They've existed in traditional finance for quite some time, because a lot of problems that we see in crypto are actually very similar to a lot of the problems that go on in traditional finance. So as we all know, finance is a very adversarial game, right? People are constantly trying to figure out, who's buying what, trying to get in front of other people. And it's much worse in crypto, in fact. So that's kind of in short what we're doing is we're trying to make finance more private, where if you can keep orders confidential, if you can keep settlements confidential, if you can keep prices confidential, then you can ultimately get better execution for traders. So trying to hopefully make finance a bit more private and not so PvP is the idea.
Okay, so you're talking about things like order book, on-chain orders. So typically when people go onto an exchange and it's an order book based exchange, they'll see other orders in there. They'll see like the depth of liquidity. They'll see where the price cliffs are, and where the barriers are, where people pay. And that's part of that adversarial game that you're sort of talking about. So the idea here is that, you could go in and place an order for a certain amount at a certain price, but people don't know that order is there until it completes, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So Renegade is fully private from the entire lifecycle of the trade. So we say it's both pre-trade private and post-trade private. So you can place an order in Renegade and no one knows about it whatsoever. It's fully encrypted, fully confidential. And you can search privately for counterparties. And then once you found a counterparty, even after you made that trade, it's still private after the trade is settled. So you get this kind of end-to-end privacy that really delivers robust execution for these bigger traders.
Okay, that's awesome. So Renegade has both an off-chain and an on-chain set of components. Where is Stylus useful in that? And can you explain a little bit about that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So since Renegade is a privacy-focused exchange, you can't put everything on chain, right? That would be nice if we could just use Stylus for everything. But unfortunately, because you need some privacy elements, you have to have some off-chain components. So yeah, as you mentioned, Renegade consists of both an off-chain and an on-chain side. The off-chain side is responsible for keeping the orders private. It's responsible for producing the zero-knowledge proofs that essentially can verify to the validity of the validity of the orders and so on. And the on-chain component is largely responsible for verifying those zero-knowledge proofs. Off-chain does proving, on-chain does verifying. And so we use Stylus for virtually all of the on-chain components. So our entire zero-knowledge proof verification scheme, all of that is written in Stylus for really cheap gas. So yeah, we do virtually all the settlement on-chain inside of Stylus.
Okay, cool. So what motivated you to how did you choose which chain to build on, and what motivated you to choose Stylus?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it was a long journey, honestly. We've been thinking about this for 18 months, 20 months at this point. And we looked at everything, to be honest. We looked at every single L2. We looked at every single L1. We did a ton of benchmarks. We really tried to find, where can this thing sit? Because Renegade is truly like a next generation, insane amount of compute you're doing here, right? Like whenever we settle a trade inside of Renegade, you're verifying the equivalent of like a dozen zero-knowledge proofs. Like it's pretty ridiculous. And to do that on ETH mainnet would be impossible. It's just way too gas intensive. So we looked at everything, and we looked at all L1s, we looked at L2s, both the optimistic and the ZK side, but we really couldn't find a single system that measured up to Stylus. Like legitimately, it's very tough to find something that was as cheap in terms of its gas. And of course, all the benefits of the Arbitrum ecosystem are great even on top of that, right? So we get all the composability with the current EVM that's out there, right? We can use all the assets that are currently in L2. We also get the security of L1s. We can inherit that. So it's really hard to make a pitch for anything other than Stylus, to be honest, once we look through everything.
Well, that obviously that's a great thing for us to hear, right? And it's great to hear this. I mean, I think it's people have described it. Stylus launched yesterday, and there's been a lot of tweets going out about it, posts about what Stylus is enabling, and quite a few people have been quite bullish about it and sort of saying this really is like the next generation of ability to write smart contracts. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I mean, it seems like that really is the case there. And in terms of was there specific features? You mentioned a little bit about gas costs and that. Were there specific features and capabilities that specifically attracted you to Stylus?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came down to the gas cost benchmarking, and we just did apples for apples comparison and tried to find the thing that was cheapest. But certainly there were a lot of things outside of pure gas that were super helpful for us. And in particular for us at Renegade is a very cryptographic focused company. A lot of the cryptography libraries are already written in Rust, right? If you look at any of these libraries, a ton of it's already in Rust. And for us, we don't want to go through and, look through everything and rewrite in the EVM. That's just not very appealing for us, both from a time point of view and also from a security point of view. We'd rather use the libraries that are already audited and already out there. We don't have to go and rewrite that in our own stack and then get them re-audited and so on. So a lot of that was reuse of components that are out there. And we make use of a lot of, off-the-shelf cryptographic libraries inside of Renegade. Also, of course, the composability with the EVM is huge for us in terms of, how we can actually build this thing in a gas efficient way that also has a giant ecosystem around it, right? You don't want to launch this into some, dead L1 where no one else is, right? Because of course, no users are there. So we really like the fact that you could cross-compose the EVM and the WASM, and also the fact that we could reuse a lot of the Rust libraries that are already out there.
Yeah, that's a couple of really interesting points there you mentioned there about the audited, using libraries that have already been audited and already been battle tested. The fact that you have the entire Rust crates ecosystem out there of libraries, third-party libraries, that a lot of them will have already been audited, used, known, trusted, that kind of thing. So that's really good that you can kind of leverage that existing ecosystem there, but you don't have to swallow the whole thing. Like you mentioned there about the composability. So, what has your kind of experience been of developing on Stylus so far? Which bits were hard, which were easy? Did you have existing Rust experience, for example?
Yeah, maybe I can chip in on this one.
Yeah.
The experience so far has been great, honestly. I'll preface this by saying so I wrote all the Stylus contracts. I don't have much Solidity experience beforehand, so it's hard to do an exact apples to apples, how much harder would this have been in Solidity. That's also part of the pitch for us, though. We were at the point where it's time to make a decision. Where do we build Renegade?
But you had Rust experience.
I had Rust experience, and I was like, well, am I going to take weeks to learn Solidity and try to write these intense cryptographic operations, things you really don't want to get wrong, or am I just going to do it in Rust, for cheaper, and using code that we have in a lot of other places in our stack, Offchain as well. And that paid out. Like, so the experience has been very smooth. It honestly, sometimes it gets to the point where you forget that you're writing smart contracts. This can be a good thing and a bad thing, because you start writing like really pretty code. It's rusty, it's idiomatic, and then the contract size gets way too big, and you're like, oh right, I've got these constraints that I still have to work within. But all things considered, at least using like how long this would have taken us to build as the proxy metric here, experience on Stylus, I think has blown any other candidates out of the water.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I was just looking up this exact tweet, and Anna behind the scenes just brought this up already. That, there's around 30,000 devs that are able to build with Solidity, and 15 million building on Rust, right? So you're a great example of somebody coming into this, from say the Rust side of things and being able to utilize your Rust experience. And that opens up smart contract development to a much, much wider audience. But also similarly, I mean, another point you made there, and this is interesting because we've seen this previously with things like JavaScript, right? In that you mentioned there about using Rust in other parts of your stack, both on-chain and off-chain. Now, Solidity is just a language used on-chain. People don't use it off-chain. I don't even think you can. Maybe there's a runtime for it off-chain, but you're not going to sit down and write Solidity off-chain. And we kind of saw the same thing happening with JavaScript like a decade or two ago, in which JavaScript was originally a browser language, and then started to move, off browser. Node.js came around. People started writing server-side stuff. And the big advantage was being able to write both front-end and back-end code in the same language, right? And so, I guess that's what you're referring to here, and that you're using Rust for both some of the smart contract stuff and some of the off-chain stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's been a huge boon, because I mean, we can get down to the nitty gritty, but it's very useful to have like shared types on chain and off chain. Use like the same exact implementation for some cryptographic operations on chain and off chain. And when we get like one part of the system audited, that now like has a blast radius throughout our code base, and so we can be even more sure that we've done things correctly, everything's up to spec, everything matches.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like you said, that the implementations are the same, because sometimes you can get, various edge cases between different implementations within different languages. And I imagine, especially within like floating point, it's a massive issue, but things like cryptographic libraries as well, I imagine that's probably a big thing where something maybe slightly handles certain edge cases differently. And, that's where you start finding bugs, right? When you get these weird edge cases, and like, the happy path is fine, and then somebody goes slightly off the beaten track, and that's where you start getting these weird things. So it's great that you're able to kind of have that same implementation on both the front end and the back end, so both on chain and off chain as well. That's cool. So what does your development workflow look like with Stylus? What sort of tooling do you use? What how's that side of things been?
So I'll say, when we started writing our Stylus contracts, the ecosystem hadn't really flourished yet. Like what my workflow isn't necessarily what I would recommend to people using Stylus now, because back when we were starting, like Open Zeppelin had just started taking a look at Stylus, and now they have like tons of great tools that I'm happy to talk about later. I've looked into a bit, but our development workflow, it basically, I would say like the core thing that we had to get right was splitting up like the very central sort of contract agnostic logic, and then the parts of the system that have to touch like contract state or make calls to other contracts. And delineating those two is very helpful for development, because the core is very straightforward. That's just Rust code. You can write that exactly how you'd expect. You can unit test that. That's the big thing. And then Rust unit testing is a joy to work with. But then when you start getting into contract interaction, you need to run like the Stylus VM. That gets tricky. You can't really unit test that. So it's nice to have that be sort of well abstracted above the core logic. And then you make like your end-to-end tests using like the local test node. So that's definitely like dictated the development workflow, is like start with the core, unit test it, like go crazy on it. It's just Rust code. And then you start layering in the sort of chain semantics.
Right. Yeah. And that's that's quite a good thing about the same language, both on and off chain, I guess, as well, is that, like you said, you can unit test small parts off chain with much lower like infrastructure around it. Like you say, it's just Rust code, right? So if you're writing a whole thing in Solidity, and you want to unit test it, you really have to have like the whole EVM runtime and that whole thing set up, which is, getting beyond a unit. I mean, it's a unit test in a certain respects, right? But there's a lot more to it there. Whereas I suppose you're able to take just a small chunk of Rust code that implements some specific algorithm and, really, really boil that down to a minimal unit test. So,
yeah.
Cool. So have there been any like specific challenges or limitations that you found whilst working with it? You mentioned a little bit about hitting things like contract size limits. I know that I was at a hackathon and somebody was trying, early adopter was trying some of the Stylus stuff, and that was one of the issues they were hitting as well. Have you found any particular challenges, and how have you addressed them?
Yeah, and I would say this gets into like the sort of latter half of the workflow, which is like, addressing those challenges. For all of the like amazing benefits that Stylus has, there are like two challenges that stand out, and that's contract size limits, because particularly when you're using the Rust SDK for Stylus, like Rust binaries are pretty big, and also the contract testing framework. So for contract size limits, like yes, Rust produces pretty large binaries, and to deal with that, like you really kind of got to get down and dirty. You have to like know how to profile your binaries. There's tools like Twiggy that let you see like, where is my code bloat coming from? And you have to get pretty creative. It's like, okay, I have these dependencies that are really like pushing my code over the limit. Maybe I fork them. Maybe I like tweak the way that the code is written there. You have to play with compiler flags a lot. You have to like move code around. Like if you read our contracts, like we have some pretty strangely abstracted functions, and it's because like sometimes just like packaging these two like maybe semantically separate functions together helps you avoid some like jumps in your code base, and brings the code size down a bit. So it looks a little funky, and then at the end of the day, you'll probably have to just split your code into multiple contracts and eat the cost of a delegate call and some wacky abstraction. Which is all a very small price to pay. It's a big battle. Like every time, like in the office, I would say like, okay, it's time to do the binary battle again. Like it does feel like you got to lock in and figure it out. But it is a small price to pay for having Stylus. And I would say on the latter like challenge that I faced, which is the testing framework. So our approach to that was to do this split of unit testable core logic that's contract agnostic, and then we kind of bit the bullet and we wrote our own like integration testing like framework. It's nothing too crazy. It uses the local test node that the Stylus team has put out, and we use ethers and alloy to just like deploy our contracts to it. Hit the functions on the contracts, make sure everything checks out. But that was definitely some overhead in getting that set up. And I mean, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but on the ecosystem side of things, it seems like OpenZeppelin has just been on a tear, like making great tooling specifically around testing that we haven't had time to like really go back and use. Like we've kind of been full steam ahead. The contracts work. Let's build the rest of the system. But seems like that latter point has received a lot of attention from the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. And it is one of the challenges when you start something like this from sort of our side of things, is that getting the tooling in place, right? Because it's not, you can try as much as you can, but it's not necessarily going to all be there on day one, right? Yeah. So, but it seems like there is a lot there at the moment, right? So there's a lot there. People are building stuff, and that's only going to grow now. More and more tooling. You mentioned things about like splitting contracts apart. I presume there's probably going to be things like optimizers and things like that that'll be coming out. They'll be able to analyze code and split it up in a better way, or combine functions or whatever it might be, in order to kind of get within the limits, in the same way that you have the optimizers for Solidity, for example, for them. So, I presume there's going to be more and more of that kind of thing kind of coming out in time. So yeah, that's great to see. So and again, another key thing about this with Stylus is, Stylus is not, it's not a new blockchain, it's not a new ecosystem. It's all built on Arbitrum. It's all built in the Arbitrum ecosystem. So you have all of the existing ecosystem partners there from within your Rust. If you want to go and call a whatever, Chainlink function or something, it's there, right? All of these things are there from the start, and you don't have to like, swallow everything to start with, right? You can have your Solidity sort of contracts, and you can then start sort of optimizing bits into Rust as necessary, I guess. So kind of what parts of your protocol do you think like benefit the most from Stylus?
Yeah, well, by and large, it's the cryptography, like the verifier that verifies the zero knowledge proofs. We kind of get the best of both worlds here because we can get like super cheap core cryptographic operations like elliptic curve, addition, and multiplication, and like cat-check hashing from the precompiles that are already present there because Stylus is interoperable with the EVM. Like we can just call those same precompiles. It costs like very little gas, like negligible almost. But then we also get to use like reference implementations and sort of widely used cryptographic libraries from Rust. Like we used ArcWorks in our case. It knows how to like, this is written by people way smarter than I who know all of like the fancy cryptography tricks for how to do these things efficiently. Like we didn't have to re-implement any of that. We can just kind of call a method on a library that does like our batch inversion in the field and like, cool, that's like saved us a bunch in gas. And we had like a reference implementation for our verifier from the Espresso team. They have a Plonk verifier, a Plonk system called Jellyfish. Like we got to just like look at their Rust code and start porting it over to Stylus, which is a lot more readable, a lot more testable, understandable, and like extensible than if I were to look at like a Solidity implementation of a Plonk verifier. It's like, oh, this is going to take like a lot more mental overhead to understand what's going on and how I can tailor it to my use case. And especially with cryptography, like it's nice to not have all of that to worry about. It's, generally also like debugging cryptography is like, it doesn't work and it's super unclear why until it does.
Yeah.
The signature doesn't verify. I don't know why.
Yeah, you're not just off by one. It's like you're off by a complete nothing works. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It just avalanches. So that's been like immensely accelerated by having Stylus, by like having the whole Rust ecosystem.
Yeah, cool. So are there any particular like development tools and frameworks you mentioned there? Like you had a chance to like build some of your own stuff, and then you looked at stuff like from other projects like Espresso's Jellyfish. Are there any other like development tools or frameworks you found that have been helpful?
There's some that I'm aware of, but I haven't had a chance to use yet. So this is like, take this with the grain of salt. It looks interesting. I think the tools that the Open Zeppelin team has been working on are like very promising. They have unit testing for like Stylus contracts, like Rust style unit testing. So that seems very helpful. They even have their own like end-to-end testing framework as well. So on the testing side, like I would take a look at what Open Zeppelin is doing. Can't endorse it because I haven't used it myself. I would also say like when you're in the binary battle, use Twiggy. If you're using the Rust Stylus SDK, Twiggy is what you can use to look at your code bloat and see what's going on there. That's been super helpful. But other than that, like I said, most of what we had to do is pretty in-house, unfortunately. Once that work is done, then you can take off. But yeah, feel free to take a look at our repo, at our contract, see if there's anything that you can use.
Yeah, that's good. Do you have any other kind of advice or best practices? And how do you recommend that devs get started with Stylus?
So let's assume devs like know what language they want to write their Stylus contracts in. Like let's assume devs know Rust because that would be where you start. I would say try writing a custom precompile for like some, I don't know, maybe some cryptographic operations. Like that's pretty neat. Like I want to do something, some pretty expressive, pretty complicated logic. Maybe I'm not great with Solidity. Like let me just call out to Rust. Or you can try porting over an existing Solidity contract into Rust. I think that's actually a pretty great way to see like, okay, well, how does this map? Like how does the like state layout of this Solidity contract, how am I going to represent that in Rust? The mutability of the methods. Like it's nice to have that reference and then port it over to understand what the differences are.
Right. And has there been like any documentation or tutorials or libraries or anything like that that you found helpful in getting going with this?
I would say, all the documentation from like the Stylus team, just like on the site, is pretty great. It's pretty thorough. The code is well documented as well. I've had to look at like the source code a couple of times. I would say the Stylus devs Telegram group, that's pretty great. Like the people are super responsive in there, very helpful. They'll like dig in and look at your code and help you figure things out. Other than that, like I said, when we got started on the contracts, it was kind of like the Stylus documentation was all we had, and honestly, it's all we needed. So I would definitely give a big thumbs up to that.
Okay, cool. And it's in terms of kind of like next steps. How do you see Stylus impacting like the broader DeFi ecosystem? Maybe that's for Chris, maybe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, on the sort of broader DeFi ecosystem, I mean, one thing I'm super excited by is more expressive DeFi primitives. So we've seen sort of a long trend of DeFi being constrained by the compute capacity of the underlying system, right? You think back to Ethereum 2015, we didn't even have L2s and we were super limited on what we can do. And now you see people exploring more into interesting DeFi primitives, all the way, even people are talking about, we want to have some AI model or some LLM and now can control your DeFi parameters. Maybe we want to do fully on-chain, governance, like all this crazy stuff I'm super excited for. And I think you really do need a 10x in compute capacity to even begin to look if those things are even possible. So I'm excited by those sorts of explorations of just extremely complicated and, intricate DeFi primitives that are accelerated by this layer.
Yeah, I guess anything to do with, like in your case, cryptography is definitely one, but anything to do with any kind of like matching algorithm or any kind of recursive algorithm that has to do a lot of computation. I know I saw a benchmark just recently that somebody did, in which, it was 10 times cheaper to run on Stylus for something computationally expensive. I mean, just for people to be aware, simple things on Stylus are still probably going to be more expensive than on Solidity at the moment. That may, improve over time, but there is a little bit of an overhead of starting up a contract on Stylus. But if you are doing heavy computation, then you can be getting a 10x saving in gas fees if you do something computationally expensive, which is amazing. How do you anticipate that Stylus will help you kind of scale and expand the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we add more primitives, it'll just get more compute intensive from here, right? We're already verifying so many zero knowledge proofs to make this dark pool possible. And if you want to add additional primitives, maybe it's a Renegade perps exchange or a Renegade lending protocol, trying to build more privacy into these systems, you're just going to have more compute constraints, right? It's just going to be rougher in terms of the benchmarks. So I think as we build this thing out even more, and as you see new primitives come online, I can see Stylus as being instrumental there.
Cool. And Renegade launched today, right? Like
an hour
ago, right?
We sent the tweet right before this showcase, just so we'd have it out there. But yeah, Renegade is fully live. Anyone can use it, as of an hour ago. So the first on-chain dark pool is here.
Wow, that's such fantastic timing, right? Getting you guys to come on here and talk about
it's a good push, right?
Yeah, on launch day, because it's great. It's like, okay, here's a really cool thing, but not only that, here's some people building a really cool thing on top of it, right from day one. Mm-hmm. So that's that's really cool. Okay, cool. Before shortly, I'm going to be sort of closing up and talking about sort of resources and stuff that people can use and find to help them themselves in their development journey with Stylus. But before I get to that bit, is there anything more that either of you two want to sort of talk about either Stylus or Renegade and what you're doing next? We've got a couple of extra minutes if you'd like to.
I mean, I think particularly for the developer audience, they might be interested in learning a bit more about our contracts. I don't know, Andrew, if you can share if people want to read more into how Renegade works, what can they look at in terms of the online resources we have?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend taking a look at our repo. We've put in a lot of love into that. So I don't know, maybe I can help you guys find the link for the contracts repo. But yeah, we've got a pretty end-to-end system there. It could be a good reference for how do you architect your code. Like I said, that split between core logic and contract logic. Take a look at our integration tests, our deploy scripts. It's a pretty complete system. It's a full live working product now. So I hope that it serves as a good reference. And feel free to come ask us questions in our Discord. If you are taking a look at the contracts, you want to know why we did a thing. If something looks wacky, it's probably because we had to fit into the binary size. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. I make myself pretty available. happy to share any knowledge that I can.
Cool. And people can find the Renegade Discord from your site, I presume?
Yes.
Yeah, check out our most recent tweet that has all the links at the bottom. So we have the trading interfaces there, the landing page, the Discord, everything you want is in that tweet.
Fantastic. Cool. Great. Okay. Well, yeah, it's been fantastic talking to you both and hearing your experiences, real world experiences of building on Stylus and what you've been able to do. And this is because like we can kind of say stuff, right? So you know, we can talk about say, hey, look, we can bring all these Rust developers in, it'll be fantastic. But to actually have you know, people here who are doing this and have like a Rust developer that's like, well, I don't know a huge amount about Solidity, but I know a lot of Rust, and that's, you know, that's the kind of thing that we're aiming to open up here with Stylus. So it's really great to see that. So just in terms of some links here and docs and stuff, let me just bring up here, if I can bring up my screen, or if Anna can bring up my screen share here. We've got a bunch of docs here. So on the Arbitrum site, we can see, I'm just trying to bring it up onto stage here. Okay, well, I'll just talk through it here. Anna, if you're able to bring my screen up, that'd be great. Yeah, there we go. Brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a on the Arbitrum docs in here. There's a whole section about Stylus. So there's a general introduction to Stylus. There's a quick start as well, so you can actually get into it if you're a developer that wants to join these fantastic folks in building cool stuff on Stylus. Then there's all of the information there as well. So docs.arbitrum.io/Stylus. And there's also as well a new site. We've got Stylus by Example. So stylus-by-example.org. There's a load of stuff here as well. Again, some hello world type stuff, getting you started, and also kind of examples of how you do certain things within Stylus on here. So that's great. If you used to the sort of Ethereum by example, or sorry, Solidity by example, this is kind of mirroring that as well. Now, if you are building some stuff and you want to contribute it back, there is the awesome Stylus repository within Offchain Labs' repo. So this is a lot of stuff here. A lot of this stuff, some of the stuff is old in here, but feel free to contribute in here. If you're building something cool and you want to put it somewhere, I'm going to showcase it, put it in here as well, and other people can then have a chance to discover it. And as just mentioned, Renegade, we're just talking about their repository. If you go there and look in their repository, they've got a bunch of stuff here about Stylus as well, and the stuff that they've done. So you can kind of go in here and have a look at some of their code that they have done. So there we go. I think that's pretty much it that we wanted to share here. Any final words from Chris or Andrew at all?
No, I mean, it was great chatting. Super excited for Stylus and super excited for Renegade.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Everybody should try writing a Stylus contract and then try using ours. Come check out our site.
Yeah, go check it out.
Exactly. And go check out Renegade and go have a look. I'm going to go and use it. I clicked on the like the testnet version this morning to have a play around with it, but now it's live on production. I'm looking to have a play around with that as well and give it a try. So yeah, it's really cool. So thanks a lot, and thanks to everybody for tuning in to this. Like I said, this is a series we're doing here, Stylus Showcase. We will be doing regular shows once a week with different projects that are building on top of Arbitrum Stylus. So you can find out from the developer point of view how developers are getting on building on this. And then, like I said, we also will have a user showcase as well, in which people can kind of find out a bit more from the user perspective as to using some of these projects. And then we'll have the Stylus Pro workshop series as well, in which you can actually get hands-on with a workshop and actually build on stuff. So fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.